For more on the Iran nuclear deal and the ins and outs of sanctions, we're now joined by Farhad Alavi in Los Angeles. He is a lawyer who specializes in trade issues like sanctions and compliance. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, why don't we just start with the concept itself, because the United States likes to use sanctions as a tool. It used it on Iran, is using it now as a tool against Russia, yet there seems to be some question about the effectiveness. The current director of national intelligence here in the United States, James Clapper, told a Senate committee in 2012 the sanctions as imposed so far have not caused Iran to change their behavior or their policy. So do they work?
Well, that's subject to debate and what people interpret as actual effect. The reality is that the sanctions have had a significant effect on Iranians' buying power, their economic activity. Their economy did contract, and as after the main sanctions started kicking in. So, in terms of the cost of goods, the availability of goods, people often point to many goods being available widely in Iran. But the reality is that logistically, it's become very difficult for even lawful goods to go to Iran, and therefore, in terms of banking, shipping, ensuring these shipments, it's become very challenging. So, the notion that it hasn't had any effect, I think, is a bit underestimating the situation.
Let me talk to you about the complexities of a deal like this, because they are complex. Not all sanctions will be repealed. What's in, what's out? We also are hearing the word phase, which to some sounds like slow. How quickly will there be action?
Well, the initial implementation will be about 90 days after the announcement that was made on Tuesday. Now, you really got to consider these to be three categories of sanctions. First are the UN Security Council resolutions, which are binding on all member states. Then you have the EU's sanctions, and then you have the US unilateral sanctions. A large part of that, the EU sanctions and the UN sanctions will gradually be phased out. Some US sanctions that also limit the activity of third countries, companies, let's say in China or France, would also be removed over time. What does remain in large part are the unilateral U.S. sanctions that limit U.S. persons dealing with Iran, like U.S. companies or U.S. individuals trading with most areas of trade with Iran. And that predates the nuclear file, which has been a phenomenon of the last 10 years. But these sanctions were originally imposed in 1995, and to a large extent, they will remain in place. So U.S. businesses that are hoping to enter into Iran will have to wait in large part for the time being.
Let me ask you about these concerns expressed by some Arab states. There's a lot of talk about whether or not this agreement will be honored. And there's also talk about these snapback provisions, which sounds quick, but can things really snap back into place that quickly? These things seem to take time. And with the threat of snapback sanctions, how many corporations will really want to do business in Iran? I mean, is that going to impact things?
Well, I think corporations that want to make substantive investments for ventures into Iran will naturally want much more clarity on the law. And the notion of snapback will naturally deter some people and some companies. Now, with respect to whether or not they can actually be snapped back, the legal provisions do enable that. I believe that the political climate is such that, if there is a violation, there are some dispute resolution mechanisms in this agreement between Iran and the P5+1. But if there is any kind of violation, I think the appetite will be there to reinstate those sanctions.
Farhad Alavi joining us from Los Angeles. Thanks so much.
Thank you.